My wife had an affair with the resort photographer during our honeymoon, and later demanded half in the divorce, but what happened next left her with nothing but regret at 29. I wasn't drifting through life, I was at the peak of it. Raised in the heart of Miami, I was the only child in a family that had built a real estate legacy from the ground up. My parents weren't the type to flaunt wealth just because they could. Everything they had they earned with grit and persistence, and they made sure I understood that value. I never lacked anything growing up, but I wasn't spoiled either. My father made it a point that I start from the bottom. While other kids my age were relaxing or partying during summer breaks, I was in the office, filing paperwork and sitting quietly in long meetings. "You don't get a seat at the table unless you earn it," he used to say, and he lived by that mantra. Back then, I thought it was unfair. Watching my friends enjoy their youth while I clocked hours in the office felt like punishment. But now, looking back, I see the wisdom behind it. My dad didn't want to hand me a legacy. I had to grow into the kind of man who could carry it. By my late 20s, I wasn't just participating, I was leading. I wasn't the CEO yet, but I was heading major projects and gaining my father's trust, day by day. My mother, just as involved, ran our company's PR and brand presence. She was the one who encouraged me to get out of my professional bubble and start mingling with people outside our industry. That push led me to a gallery event where I met Rachel. Even now, saying her name used to feel like saying something sacred. Rachel had that kind of presence. She wasn't just beautiful, she was captivating, tall, graceful, with long dark hair and a confidence that turned heads the moment she entered a room. When I first saw her, she was laughing beneath a chandelier, a glass of red wine in hand, looking like she belonged in a high-end fragrance ad. She caught my eye, and before long, she had my heart. Our conversation flowed so naturally, it was as if we'd known each other in another life. She worked in PR too, mainly with fashion labels and digital influencers. Her poise, her sense of style, her ability to say the right thing at the right time, it all made sense. I remember thinking, she's exactly the kind of woman who fits into the world I've built. We started dating soon after. For a while, it felt like I was living out the perfect script: successful career, supportive family, and now the woman of my dreams. Rachel was witty, driven, and elegant, and everyone in my world approved. My mom adored her. Even my dad, who was slow to trust anyone, admitted she was clever and had potential. A year and a half into our relationship, I proposed. I did it the only way I knew how, big and bold. A private yacht, a sea of roses, live music drifting over the waves. It was cinematic, just like she liked. She cried, said yes, and within days she was already knee-deep in wedding plans. The wedding was extravagant. 500 guests, designer everything, an oceanfront venue straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Rachel was the star, and she thrived in the spotlight. Cameras, compliments, attention. It all fueled her, and I was happy to watch her shine. At the time, I didn't question her hunger for attention. I thought it was part of her charm. As a wedding gift, my parents sent us on a honeymoon to Bora Bora. If you've never been, it's as close to paradise as you can get. We stayed in one of those luxurious overwater villas with a private deck, an infinity pool, and glass floors where fish glided beneath our feet. The first few days were bliss. We swam, snorkeled, lounged, and indulged in the island's beauty. Rachel, of course, documented everything, every outfit, every meal, every sunset. It all went on her socials. She was obsessed with aesthetics and being goals. I didn't mind. I liked showing her off. She looked amazing in every photo, and it felt good knowing the world saw what I had. One evening, the resort arranged a beachfront dinner for us. Candles, private chef, the whole romantic fantasy. Rachel wore a dress that danced in the wind, her smile glowing in the candlelight. As I watched her pose for pictures, I thought, this is everything I ever wanted. But that night, as she put her phone down and said, "We're everyone's couple goals right now," something shifted. There was a flicker in the back of my mind, a whisper that something didn't feel right. It was small, almost too subtle to name. Like maybe she cared more about how our life looked than how it felt. I ignored it. We were in paradise. What could possibly go wrong? It might sound petty to bring up, especially given the setting we were in, but something about it unsettled me. We'd be sitting on our private deck, a panorama of sapphire water unfolding endlessly before us, the air warm and still with a breeze soft as breath, and Rachel would be glued to her screen. Not sometimes. Constantly. She wasn't just checking messages. She was cycling through a loop, texting, scrolling, adjusting filters, rewriting captions. The glow of her phone screen became more familiar than the sunlight reflecting off the sea. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just excited to share our experience. After all, this place was incredible, and she looked amazing in every shot. Her captions were long, gushing things like, "Feeling so blessed to be spending forever with the love of my life," or, "Pinch me, I must be dreaming. Honey Moangles." The internet loved it. Every post was met with a flood of likes and adoration. People saw the perfect couple living the perfect dream. And Rachel? She thrived on it. I could tell by the way she lit up when new notifications popped up, or when someone commented, "You two are literal goals." But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trip wasn't really about us. It was about appearances. About how beautiful everything looked from the outside. One afternoon, we were lounging by the pool. She had a cocktail in one hand, her phone in the other. I leaned over and said, "You know, this place is even better when you look at it with your own eyes." She chuckled. "Come on, babe. Don't be such a grump. People love seeing what we're doing. It's cute." "Yeah, I get it," I said. "But maybe we could just put the phones down for a little while? It's our honeymoon." She sighed and rolled her eyes, placing her phone face down on the table. "Fine. Happy now?" Her tone was playful on the surface, but there was an edge under it. I didn't press. I let it go. The last thing I wanted was to start a fight over something that felt so petty. But it wasn't just the phone. Something else gnawed at me, something harder to name. Rachel was overly friendly with everyone at the resort, especially the male staff. I'm not the possessive type. I don't get jealous easily. But her friendliness was flirtation disguised as charm. She'd laugh too long at their jokes, lean in too close, ask overly personal questions with that spark in her eyes that once made me feel like I was the only one in the room. The first time I really noticed was at the beach bar. A young bartender with a thick French accent was mixing a drink, and Rachel leaned over the counter, smiling widely. "Wow, you're amazing at that," she said, watching him work. "Have you been doing this long?" He chuckled and started telling her his story, how he ended up in Bora Bora, what he loved about the island. Rachel drank it in like it was a romance novel. She nodded, laughed, and touched her hair. I just sat beside her, nursing my own drink, invisible. Later, as we walked away, I said, "You and the bartender really hit it off." She gave me a teasing grin. "Oh, stop, I was just being nice. You're not jealous, are you?" "No," I said, forcing a smile. "Just maybe tone it down a bit." She rolled her eyes. "God, you're so sensitive. Relax." That became her phrase for everything. Relax. Like I was imagining problems that weren't there. But it didn't stop with the bartender. It was the guy at the front desk, the snorkeling instructor, and the photographer at the beach. She always found a way to command attention, and people gave it to her freely. I told myself it was just her personality. She was magnetic. People were drawn to her. But deep down, it bothered me. Not because I didn't trust her, but because she seemed to need that attention more than she needed our time together. Then came the moment everything shifted. We were having breakfast on the deck. The sky was still streaked with pale pink, and the waves lapped gently below us. Rachel was slicing mango when she said, "I've been thinking. We should book a real photo shoot while we're here. Professional. Something special." I blinked. "Haven't we already taken enough pictures?" "Not like this," she said, setting down her fork. "These are memories we'll want forever. Besides, everyone keeps saying how stunning our trip looks. It would be amazing to have something really high quality to share." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean for Instagram?" She rolled her eyes. "It's not just for Instagram. It's for us too." I didn't love the idea, but I didn't argue. If it makes you happy, go for it. That afternoon she came back from the concierge glowing. "Found the perfect guy," she said. "His name's Marco. He shot a bunch of influencers. Super talented." "Great," I murmured, half listening. Just another Rachel thing, I figured. Something to indulge her with. I didn't realize then that Marco wasn't just another photographer. That shot, that decision, was the thread that started to unravel everything. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We had already done one photo shoot with Marco earlier in the week, and Rachel wouldn't stop gushing about how amazing he was. She praised his style, his eye for lighting, and his ability to capture the perfect moment. She even half joked about hiring him for future vacations, laughing as if it were the most harmless idea in the world. Whatever makes her happy, I told myself. I figured it gave me a chance to relax. Maybe I'd read by the pool, grab a drink, and take a nap without needing to wait around while she played dress-up for the camera. I wasn't exactly thrilled about sitting through another long session of Rachel striking poses while someone else worshipped her through a lens. She'd left around late afternoon, wearing one of those dresses she'd packed specifically for content. I didn't think she'd be gone too long. Sunset shoots usually wrapped up fast once the light faded. But hours passed, and there was no sign of her. I stayed in the villa, scrolling through emails on my laptop, sipping water from the minibar, half watching the sky turn from gold to deep purple. She returned sometime after the last streak of light vanished behind the horizon. I was still in the living room when she strolled in, practically glowing, her sandals dangling from her fingers. "Marco is incredible," she said, tossing her shoes to the side and flopping down beside me on the couch. "You're going to love these shots. Honestly, they might be the best photos I've ever taken." "That's great," I replied, not even looking up from my screen. I figured she'd show me a few right then. She usually did. But instead, she grabbed her phone and disappeared into the bedroom. I thought it was odd. Rachel always liked to preview her shots immediately, but I chalked it up to her editing routine. She preferred to tweak every frame before sharing it, even with me. Part of her personal brand, as she called it. Later that evening, we went down to dinner. I was still a bit distracted, my head buzzing with questions I didn't know I needed to ask yet. We were finishing dessert when a woman from the resort staff approached our table. "Excuse me, sir," she said with a polite smile. "These are the photos from your wife's session with Marco earlier. He asked that we deliver them directly to you." She handed me a small USB drive. "Oh," I said, a little surprised. "Thanks." Rachel didn't say anything, just continued sipping her wine like nothing had happened. I figured Marco had simply passed along the raw files for review, something most professionals did after a shoot. I slipped the USB into my pocket, planning to take a look later. That night, Rachel said she was exhausted and turned in early. I stayed in the living room, scrolling through social media while sipping on a soda. Sometime past midnight, I remembered the USB. Curious, I plugged it into my laptop. At first, everything seemed normal, breathtaking even. The shots were technically perfect. Rachel in a long, flowing dress, standing ankle-deep in the surf, the sun melting into the water behind her. She looked radiant, ethereal, like someone born for the camera. I clicked through image after image, admiring the composition, the lighting, the confidence in her poses. But then, something changed. One photo caught my attention. It wasn't staged like the others. Rachel was sitting in a lounge chair, laughing at something or someone just outside the frame. Her posture was relaxed, her expression unfiltered. It looked more like a candid moment than a planned shot. I frowned, clicking to the next, and then the next. The casual laugh turned into a sideways lean. The lean turned into a touch, her hand resting lightly on Marco's knee. Then came the photo that shattered me. Rachel and Marco mid-kiss. It wasn't a soft accidental brush. It was deliberate, passionate. His hand gripped her waist, her fingers tangled in his hair. My breath caught in my chest, my stomach knotted so tightly I thought I might be sick. I sat frozen, the laptop on my knees, heart thudding in my ears. I clicked again. More photos, more angles, more intimacy. Rachel rested her head on Marco's shoulder. Rachel laughed as he touched her cheek. Rachel was undressing while standing inches from him, clearly not caring that the camera was still rolling. Then came the final images, graphic, undeniable, and soul-crushing. Rachel was topless, in our villa. Marco stood behind her, hands on her hips, both of them staring into each other like lovers who forgot the rest of the world existed. I closed my eyes, my hand instinctively slamming the laptop shut. The image remained, burned into my mind like a brand. My pulse raced, my hands were trembling. I just sat there, stunned, motionless in a room that suddenly felt foreign. It wasn't just betrayal, it was desecration. She hadn't snuck off to some secret hideaway. She did this in the very space we were supposed to be making memories as newlyweds. I don't remember how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? Time stopped making sense. All I could do was loop the same questions in my head. Why? How long? What else had she lied about? Eventually, I stood up and paced the room, clenching and unclenching my fists. I thought about confronting her right then, waking her up and demanding answers. But rage would only make things worse. I needed clarity. I needed control. So I did nothing, at least for the moment. The next morning, she woke up bright and cheerful, as if nothing had happened. She chatted about breakfast plans, mentioned something about snorkeling. I could barely look at her. She must have noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You've been really quiet today." "I'm fine," I replied with a smile I had to physically force onto my face. "Just tired." She didn't push it, which made me even angrier. If the roles were reversed, I'd have asked 100 questions, tried to get to the bottom of it. But not Rachel. She was too busy texting, probably planning her next post. That night, after she fell asleep again, I opened the folder one more time. This time I studied the timestamps. The first explicit photo wasn't from the shoot that afternoon. It was from 2 days earlier. 2 days. That meant this wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness, caught in the emotion of a sunset. Rachel had been sneaking around, sleeping with Marco, repeatedly, behind my back, while I was nearby. While I thought we were building our future. I couldn't sleep. My mind refused to rest. I replayed everything. Her sudden shifts in mood, her constant texting, her little disappearances. The puzzle pieces were all there. I just hadn't seen how they fit together until it was too late. Looking back, the signs were always there. The way she laughed a little too hard at Marco's jokes, the way she had been glued to her phone from the moment we arrived. Every small red flag I brushed aside out of love or naivety was now burning in neon. It was no longer a suspicion, it was fact. She'd cheated on me. And not just that, she did it here, during our honeymoon, in the same space we were supposed to be building the foundation of our marriage. That morning I woke up with one thing on my mind: confrontation. I wasn't going to tiptoe around this anymore. Rachel needed to know that I knew, that I wasn't stupid, that I wasn't going to pretend everything was okay while she smiled at my face and lied behind my back. When I walked out into the living area, she was already up, lounging on the terrace with a cup of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling like it was just another peaceful day in paradise. Her legs were crossed, sunglasses on, toes tapping to music only she could hear. I stood there for a moment, watching her. My blood boiled just looking at her, but I forced myself to keep calm. This wasn't going to be a screaming match. This was going to be the moment she realized everything was about to change. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice casual as I walked over and poured myself a cup of coffee. She glanced up, smiled like she had nothing to hide. "Good morning. I was thinking we could try that couple's paddleboarding session today. Doesn't that sound fun?" I took a sip of my coffee, sat beside her and replied smoothly, "Yeah, maybe. By the way, I got the photos from your shoot yesterday. The resort dropped off a USB last night." Her reaction was subtle, barely a flicker. But I saw it. Her face froze for a split second. Her fingers paused on her screen. If I hadn't been looking for it, I might have missed it, but it was there, that moment of panic. "Oh, really?" she said, recovering quickly. "That's great. Marco's work is amazing, isn't it?" "Yeah. Interesting," I said, watching her carefully. "You didn't mention you were doing, some extra poses." She gave a nervous laugh, her smile tightening. "What do you mean?" I set my mug down, my tone sharpened, my eyes locked on hers. "Why don't you tell me what you were really doing yesterday? Or better yet, the day before that, too?" Her smile faltered, the mask cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, the tremble in her voice barely hidden. "Cut the crap, Rachel," I snapped. "I saw the photos, all of them." For a moment she just stared at me, completely still, like a deer caught in headlights. Her lips parted, closed, then opened again. "Wait, what photos are you talking about? The ones Marco sent? There must be some kind of mistake." "There's no mistake," I said coldly. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder I had saved the night before, and held it up to her face. I didn't even bother scrolling, I just selected the photo of her kissing Marco. Full on, hands in hair, body against body. That image told the entire story. "Explain this," I said, my voice low and venomous. Rachel looked at the screen, her face turned pale, her lips trembled. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, really? Because it looks exactly like what I think it is. You've been sneaking around with Marco. On our honeymoon." She reached out, her voice breaking. "I can explain." "Explain what?" I said, louder now. "That you accidentally made out with our photographer? This was some kind of heat-of-the-moment mistake?" Her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't planned," she said quickly. It just happened. I was confused. You've been distant lately, always on your laptop, always working. I felt, I don't know, lonely." "Lonely," I repeated, my voice rising. "Lonely. We spent every single day together in paradise, and you were lonely?" She began sobbing, full-on sobbing now, mascara smudging. "I made a mistake," she cried. "I was stupid. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stared at her. "So you admit it? It wasn't just a kiss?" She froze. And that silence told me everything. "You're unbelievable," I said, shaking my head. This whole time, while I was thinking about our future, you were hooking up with some resort staff like a bored influencer on vacation. Please, she begged, reaching for my hand. It didn't mean anything. Marco doesn't mean anything to me. I pulled my hand away. You know what doesn't mean anything? Your promises. Your vows. This whole damn marriage, apparently. That's not fair, she cried. I love you. You don't get to say that, I said sharply, not after this. She broke down again, crying harder, clinging to any hope that I might still be salvageable, but I was already gone. My heart, my trust, my respect for her, all shattered. I'm done, I said. I don't want to hear any more excuses. You showed me exactly who you are, and I'm done pretending I don't see it. She tried to argue, but I stood and walked inside. I grabbed my phone and dialed the resort manager. Rachel followed me, her voice cracking. What are you doing? Making arrangements, I said flatly. You're out of here. You can't just kick me out, she shrieked. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem. She stood there sobbing as I spoke to the manager. I'm calling from Villa 14. My wife will no longer be staying here. Please move her to any available room in the main building, and ensure she doesn't have access to this villa again. There was a pause on the other end. The manager sounded surprised but professional. Of course, sir. I'll arrange it immediately. I ended the call and looked back at Rachel. Her jaw dropped. You're being ridiculous. You can't just throw me out like this, she cried, voice cracking under the weight of panic and disbelief. I turned to face her, my voice sharp and unflinching. Watch me. As Rachel scrambled to gather her belongings, frantically stuffing dresses and sandals into her luggage, I stepped away and pulled out my phone. I wasn't going to stop there. Her betrayal had gone far beyond emotional damage. She had crossed a line and there would be consequences. I called my father. He had always been my anchor in storms like this, calm, analytical, and when necessary, absolutely ruthless. He picked up on the first ring, and I didn't waste a second. I laid everything out, start to finish. I spared no detail. I told him about the photos, the lies, the blatant disregard for everything our marriage was supposed to mean. He didn't interrupt, but I could hear his breathing change, the measured silence on the other end growing heavier with each sentence. When I finally stopped talking, he let out a long breath. I knew there was something off about her, he said at last. But this is a whole new level of disrespect. What do you think I should do? I asked, even though deep down I already knew the answer. You don't leave her with a single thing, he said, his voice clipped and cold. She's done. Credit cards, accounts, company access, everything. Shut it all down. Already working on it, I replied. What about her flight home? Cancelled, he said without missing a beat. Let her figure it out on her own. I smirked. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Once I hung up, I called our family's financial team and had them start the process. Within the hour, Rachel was cut off. The credit cards she loved to wave around like accessories, disabled. Her name on our joint accounts, removed. Even the emergency fund she insisted on keeping for just-in-case scenarios, frozen. She was officially on her own. When the resort staff arrived to escort her from the villa, she made one final, desperate attempt. Please, she sobbed, standing at the doorway, her suitcase in hand. Don't do this. I'll do anything. We can fix this. I was stupid. Just give me another chance. I crossed my arms, looked her in the eye, and said flatly, Fix this. The only thing you can do now is leave. Maybe Marco can help you figure out your next move. Her tears vanished instantly, replaced by rage. You'll regret this, she snapped, venom in her voice. You'll regret treating me like this. I couldn't help but laugh, a low, bitter laugh that came from a place deeper than anger. The only thing I regret is marrying you. Now get out. The staff led her away. I stood in the doorway as she disappeared down the path, the sound of suitcase wheels trailing behind her. And just like that, she was gone. For a long moment, I stood there in silence, letting the finality of it settle. My wife, the woman I had imagined building a life with, was nothing more than a fraud, a liar, a user. And yet, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel devastated. I felt free. The resort confirmed she'd been moved to one of the standard rooms in the main building. Nothing luxurious, just a basic bed and bathroom, no private deck, no ocean view, no concierge service. It was poetic, really. She thought she was too good for me, for us. Now she could experience what it felt like to be just another guest. By that evening, everything was done. Rachel had been cut off financially, emotionally, and physically. I hadn't left a single loose thread. But there was still one part of the mess I hadn't dealt with. Marco, the sleazy resort photographer who had inserted himself into my life and thought he could get away with it. The next morning, after a long dreamless sleep, I made one more call, this time to the resort manager. "Good morning," the man said cheerfully. "How can I assist you today?" "I have a problem with one of your employees," I said bluntly. "Marco, your photographer." There was a pause and I could almost hear him sit up straighter. "I see," he said cautiously. "What seems to be the issue?" I drew in a breath, holding back the fury boiling just beneath my voice. "The issue," I said, "is that your photographer has been having an affair with my wife on your property during what was supposed to be our honeymoon." His silence was deafening. "I don't know what to say," he stammered. "This is the first I'm hearing of any such behavior." "Well," I said sharply, "I have proof, photos, explicit ones, taken during one of their little sessions. Do you want me to send them to you, or should I go directly to your corporate office?" Another pause, longer this time. "That won't be necessary," he said quickly. "Please, allow us to handle this internally. I assure you, we take these kinds of allegations very seriously." "You'd better," I said, "because I'm not letting this slide." By the end of the day, he called me back. "Marco has been terminated," the manager said, voice crisp and formal. "Effective immediately, he will no longer be associated with our resort in any capacity. And let me extend our sincerest apologies for the distress this has caused you." "Good to hear," I replied. "And I assume you'll be taking steps to prevent something like this from happening again?" "Absolutely," he said. "This was a serious violation of policy. We're already revising our staff conduct procedures." It felt like a small win, but it wasn't enough. Marco had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. I called a friend back in Miami who had a knack for digging into people. Within hours, he sent me links. Marco's Instagram, his portfolio, even a few tagged posts from previous clients. That's when the pattern started to emerge. Rachel wasn't his first. Marco had a habit of getting close to female clients. His feed was full of glamorous women in tropical settings, all gushing in the captions about how comfortable he made them feel, how magical their shoot was. The language was vague, but the photos were intimate, too intimate for a standard professional relationship. I wasn't the first man Marco had humiliated, but I was going to be the last. There was something about the way Marco touched Rachel in those photos that went beyond anything professional. His hand placements, the looks exchanged, even the casual, candid shots. None of it sat right. I couldn't shake the feeling that this guy had done this before, that Rachel wasn't his first special client. So, I started digging. I went back to Marco's public profiles, scrolling through his Instagram and professional portfolio. At first glance, it all looked legit. Breathtaking travel shots, glowing client reviews, and lots of comments from women praising his work. But the deeper I looked, the more patterns I started to notice. Certain women appeared multiple times. Their poses, the captions, the chemistry. It all had a strangely familiar vibe. Too familiar. I decided to reach out. I messaged a handful of the women who had tagged Marco in their posts. I kept it respectful, just asked if their experience with him was strictly professional. Most of them didn't respond. I figured they didn't want to get involved or maybe assumed I was being petty. But then one did. Her name was Lisa, and she had stayed at the same resort just a few months before us. When I told her what had happened, how Marco had seduced my wife during our honeymoon, her response was instant. "That guy's a creep," she wrote. During our shoot, he kept making these weird comments. At one point, he suggested we do some boudoir-style shots. I shut it down right away, but it made me super uncomfortable. That was the validation I needed. Lisa's story matched too closely. The flirtation, the boundary pushing, the sense of entitlement. Marco wasn't just a photographer, he was a predator, using his job to prey on vulnerable, often married women. I asked Lisa if she'd be willing to speak up. She agreed without hesitation. Over the next few days, I compiled everything. Screenshots of Marco's social media, Lisa's statements, and even vague testimonies I managed to coax from 2 other women who'd had similar experiences. Each one described the same behavior. Inappropriate comments, uncomfortable touching, and the same push toward intimate photo styles. Once I had had enough, I filed a formal complaint with the resort's corporate office. I attached every piece of evidence I had, including Lisa's story and several screenshots showing Marco's consistent patterns. It didn't take long to get a response. The head of guest relations called me personally, apologizing profusely. They assured me a full investigation was already underway and that Marco's employment status was under immediate review. but I wasn't about to leave it in their hands alone. I took it a step further. I submitted the same dossier to several major travel forums and review websites. I made sure not to name the resort directly. I didn't want to ruin their reputation entirely, but I made sure Marco's name was front and center. I included quotes from the testimonies and strongly suggested that travelers think twice before hiring him for any photo session. The story took off. Within days, it started circulating on social media. People began sharing their own uncomfortable interactions with Marco. His Instagram, once full of staged glamour, was now being flooded with angry comments. Words like manipulative, unprofessional, and abusive were popping up everywhere. By the end of the week, Marco's entire digital footprint had vanished. His social media accounts were gone. His website disappeared. And just like that, the travel photography world lost one of its most toxic players. I felt no guilt. He had manipulated women, taken advantage of his position, and crossed lines that should never be crossed. Meanwhile, Rachel had the audacity to text me a few days after Marco was fired. "I can't believe you got him fired. That's so extreme." I stared at the message for a full minute before closing the screen. I didn't respond. She still didn't get it. She thought she could lie, cheat, and humiliate me, then walk away untouched while I played the villain. Not this time. But she didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Rachel kept pushing, text after text, voicemail after voicemail, all the same recycled lines. "I made a mistake. Please talk to me. We can fix this." And then she started showing up again. The first time was just after sunset. I had come back from a swim and was sitting on the villa's deck, letting the ocean breeze clear my mind. That's when I heard her voice, shrill and breaking, from outside the gate. "You can't ignore me forever. We need to talk." I stood, walked to the gate slowly, and looked her in the eyes through the bars. She looked like a mess. Her hair was tangled, her makeup smeared, and there were bags under her eyes. She looked exactly like the person I had just removed from my life. "Go back to your room, Rachel," I said coldly. "There's nothing to talk about." "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. I love you, okay? I just want to talk." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "No, Rachel, you don't love me. You love the perks. You love what I gave you." "That's not true," she snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "I married you because I love you. You're the one who's throwing everything away." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm throwing everything away? You're the one who slept with someone else on our honeymoon. You destroyed this marriage, not me." She started crying again, desperate. "Please just let me come back to the villa. We can talk. We can figure it out." "No," I said. "You're done here. And if you don't leave now, I'll have security walk you back." Her expression changed instantly. The tears vanished, replaced by hatred. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "You can't just throw me away like trash." I didn't respond. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. That was the last time I spoke to her, in Bora Bora. When it came time to leave, I booked an earlier flight back to Miami. I wanted out, away from the island, away from the drama, and most importantly, away from her. But while I was focused on escaping the fallout, Rachel was busy flipping the script. By the time I landed back home, whispers were already making their way to me through mutual friends. Rachel had been busy spinning a new story, one where she was the victim. According to her, I had been controlling, emotionally distant, and even abusive. She told people I abandoned her in a foreign country, cut her off financially without warning, and left her stranded without a way home. Her most outrageous move? Going to her parents. Of course she did. She needed someone to clean up the mess, and who better than Mommy and Daddy? They were wealthy enough to buy her a ticket back, but nowhere near my family's level of influence. She fed them some pathetic sob story about how I mistreated her and left her overseas, helpless and alone. Naturally, they believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was their daughter. Rachel had always been her parents' golden child, spoiled, praised, protected. She was used to getting her way no matter the consequences. But what she didn't count on was how far I was willing to go to make sure she didn't walk away from this unscathed. She underestimated me. That was her biggest mistake. The moment I landed back in Miami, I went straight to my lawyer, James. I didn't waste time. I brought him everything, every photo, every explicit message, every recording of her sobbing apologies, and the voicemails that twisted the knife even deeper. He went through each piece of evidence methodically, never once flinching at the ugliness. "She really thought you'd let this slide?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "She thought she could play the victim," I replied. "But we're done playing games." Within hours, James was already drafting the divorce papers. The objective was clear. Rachel walks away with nothing. Not a dime, not a car, not a crumb of the life she tried to destroy. But I wasn't stopping there. Rachel had run to her parents the moment things fell apart. She fed them some overdramatic tale about how I abandoned her, painted herself as the poor heartbroken wife left in a foreign country with no way home. They believed her, of course. Why wouldn't they? She'd been spinning them stories since she was old enough to form a sentence. What she didn't expect was that I'd go straight to the source. I called her father directly. No middlemen, no lawyers, just a calm, direct request to meet. He sounded cautious on the phone, even a little annoyed, but agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown the following afternoon. He looked uncomfortable the second I walked in. He fidgeted with his cup, shifted in his seat, and glanced around like he didn't want to be seen with me. I sat across from him, calm and collected. "I'm not sure what this is about," he said, already on the defensive. "It's about your daughter," I replied, unlocking my phone. "She's been lying to you." Before he could interject, I slid the phone across the table and played a short slideshow of the photos. Rachel wrapped around Marco, the kisses, the intimacy, the betrayal. His eyes widened, the color drained from his face. He scrolled through each one in silence, his mouth pressed into a tight line. "This is," he stammered, "this can't be real." "It's real," I said, "and she's been feeding you a fairy tale to cover it up." He didn't say much after that, just stared at the table, ashamed. And honestly, I didn't care. I wasn't there for his sympathy. I was there to set the record straight and cut off her safety net. Word spread fast after that. Her parents pulled back. The financial cushion she'd always depended on, gone. Friends who had rushed to her side began distancing themselves, embarrassed they'd fallen for her act. No one wants to be associated with a proven liar. But Rachel, of course, wasn't done. The day after she was served with divorce papers, she stormed into James's office, demanding to speak with me. I wasn't there, but he later told me about the scene. "She thinks she's entitled to half," he said with a smirk. "Doesn't realize how airtight your family's setup is." That was the beauty of it. Every major asset, our house, the vehicles, the investments, wasn't in my name. They were under my parents' trust or held through the company. Rachel had no legal claim, and with clear evidence of her infidelity, even her argument for spousal support crumbled. When she finally realized this, she lost it. She called me screaming, absolutely livid. "You're such a coward," she shouted. "You put everything in your parents' name so I wouldn't get a damn thing. That's disgusting." "No, Rachel," I said calmly. "What's disgusting is cheating on your husband during your honeymoon and expecting a payout for it." "I made a mistake," she yelled. "No," I said. "You made a choice. Now live with it." She tried arguing, ranting about love, fairness, everything she thought would manipulate me. But I didn't let her finish. I hung up. That was the final nail. Rachel was done. There was nothing left for her to fight over. The divorce was finalized in just a few months. She walked away with nothing. No money, no assets, not even a sympathetic ear from the friends and family who once adored her. And me? I moved on. I poured myself into my work, leaned on my family, and used the pain as fuel. I rebuilt, not just my life, but my standards. I realized I deserved someone who respected me, who valued loyalty over image, honesty over drama. Looking back, I don't regret a single move I made. Rachel gambled with our marriage and she lost. She paid the price for her betrayal in full. And me? I came out of it stronger, wiser, and far more dangerous to anyone who thinks they can play me for a fool again.